The moment I walked into my own kitchen that Tuesday morning and saw my daughter sitting at my table like nothing had happened, I almost didn't recognize her. She had that same look she'd worn since she was 17, chin slightly up, eyes a little too steady, the expression of someone who had already decided how the conversation was going to go. 3 weeks. It had been 3 weeks since I'd found out, and now here she was, asking me for money again. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the city of Edmonton, designing bridges and drainage systems that most people drive over without a second thought. I retired 4 years ago with a decent pension, a paid-off house in Sherwood Park, and what I believed, genuinely believed, was a close family. My wife Carol passed away 7 years ago from ovarian cancer. She was 62. We'd been married 41 years. After Carol died, my daughter Renee became the center of my world. She was 34 at the time, married to a man named Thierry, living in a nice neighborhood and street. Albert with their 2 kids, my grandchildren, Liam, who was 9 then, and Sophie, who was 6. I threw myself into being present for them. Every birthday, every school concert, every hockey practice Liam had at 6 in the morning. I was there. I told myself it was what Carol would have wanted. Maybe it was. Maybe I just needed somewhere to put all that love that no longer had a place to go. The financial help started small, the way these things always do. 6 months after Carol died, Renee called to tell me that Thierry's hours had been cut at his job. He worked in logistics for a trucking company out of Nisku. They were behind on their car payment. Could I help? Of course I could. It was $1,400. I didn't think twice. Then it was the furnace the following winter. Then it was new tires, because the roads were icy and the kids were in the car. Then it was Liam's hockey fees. Then Sophie's gymnastics. Then a weekend trip to Banff that Renee said the kids really needed after a hard school year. Each time, there was a reason. Each time, the reason made sense when she said it. I never wrote any of it down. I didn't want to. Writing it down would have made it feel like a transaction, and it wasn't a transaction. It was family. By the time Liam turned 16, I had given Renee and Thierry somewhere in the neighborhood of $80,000 over 9 years. I know that number because I eventually sat down and added it up, and even then I had to stop halfway through because my hands were shaking. Not from anger, from something closer to embarrassment. Not at them, at myself, for how long it had taken me to see the shape of what was happening. Thierry made decent money once his company stabilized. Renee had gone back to work part-time as a dental hygienist when Sophie started school. They weren't struggling anymore, not really, but the requests kept coming. They'd renovated the basement. Could I help with the overrun? Liam wanted to do a hockey development camp in Kelowna. Would I cover it? The minivan needed replacing. They'd found a good deal, but were a little short. There was always something, and I always said yes, because saying no felt like withdrawing, like becoming one of those distant fathers you read about in advice columns. Last spring, about 14 months ago now, Renee called with what she described as a beautiful idea. Our family had a milestone coming up, what would have been my 48th anniversary with Carol. Renee said she wanted to do something meaningful, a real celebration of their love story, of our family's foundation. She'd been looking at a venue in Jasper, a lodge that could accommodate a private event. She wanted to invite Carol's sisters, my brother Harold and his wife from Saskatoon, some of our old family friends, Renee's in-laws. A proper gathering, a tribute. I thought it was genuinely thoughtful. I teared up a little on the phone. Carol would have loved it, I told her. I said I wanted to be involved in planning it. Renee said, of course, we'd do everything together. She started sending me photos of the venue, sample menus, a rough guest list. We talked about it several times. I transferred the first deposit, $12,000 in April. Then the catering quote came in, and I covered that, another $14,000. Then the photographer, the accommodations for out-of-town guests, the floral arrangements Carol used to love, white peonies and green hydrangea. By the time Renee said everything was confirmed, I had put in just over $53,000. I want to be precise about that number. $53,240. I remember it because it's what I put into the joint account Renee had set up specifically for the event. I'd thought that was practical, a dedicated account so everything was organized. She had signing authority because she was handling the vendors. The event was scheduled for the 3rd weekend of September, a Saturday. Renee had said she'd send me the final itinerary so I could arrange to drive up to Jasper on the Friday. I kept waiting for it. I sent her a text in early September asking about the schedule. She said she'd get it to me that week. Then she was busy. Then Thierry had a work thing. Then Sophie had a competition. I kept not pushing too hard because I didn't want to seem like I was micromanaging something she'd worked so hard to put together. On Sunday, September 22nd, I called Renee to check in and see how the weekend had gone, assuming it had been pushed or that somehow the itinerary had slipped through the cracks and I'd missed it. She picked up on the third ring. "How was Jasper?" I said. There was a pause, not a long one, maybe 2 seconds, but I felt it. "It was lovely," she said. "The weather was perfect." I stood in my living room with the phone against my ear and looked out at my backyard, at the old birch tree Carol had planted 20 years ago, and I said, very quietly, "When exactly did this happen, Renee?" Another pause. "Dad, the event was Saturday. I thought you knew the dates." I had not known the dates. Or rather, the final confirmed dates had never been sent to me. I had asked. I had waited. And while I was waiting, my daughter had held a $53,000 celebration of my marriage, in my name, in Carol's name, with Carol's sisters and my brother Harold and 30 of our closest family friends, and she had not invited me. I didn't raise my voice. I'm not sure why. Some part of me went very still, the way you go still when you're processing something that doesn't fit any category you've prepared for. I said I needed to think, and I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for the rest of that afternoon. I called Harold. He was quiet for a moment and then said, carefully, that he'd assumed I was coming, that people had asked about me, that Renee had told them I hadn't been feeling well and had sent my regrets. I thanked him and said I'd explain later. I called Carol's older sister, my sister-in-law Maureen, who lives in Red Deer. She was horrified. She said she'd been wondering all evening why I wasn't there. She said Renee had told her I had a bad back and couldn't make the drive. 2 different stories. 2 lies. Told to 2 different people. To explain why I wasn't at my own wife's memorial celebration that I had entirely funded. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark in the bedroom Carol and I had shared for 31 years, and I tried to find a version of events that made what had happened forgivable. Maybe Renee had genuinely made a scheduling mistake. Maybe there had been a miscommunication about the dates. But then I thought about Harold's voice, that careful hesitation. I thought about the 2 different excuses she'd given to 2 different people. I thought about the joint account with my $53,000 in it, and her name as the signing authority, and I understood that this had not been a mistake. Over the following week I found out more, in pieces. The way you find out things when the people around you gradually realize you're not going to fall apart. Maureen called me back 2 days later and said she'd talked to Carol's younger sister, Janet, who'd been at the event, and that there had been a speech. Renee had given a speech about Carol, about their family, about the values she'd inherited from her mother. There had been a slideshow. There had been dancing. It had, by all accounts, been a beautiful evening. Liam called me 9 days after. He was 23 now, studying kinesiology at the University of Alberta. He called from outside. I could hear the wind, like he didn't want anyone to hear him. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't known until a few days before that I wasn't invited, and that when he'd asked his mother about it, she'd said it would be too emotional for me, that I would make the evening heavy, that people needed to celebrate Carol without worrying about how I was handling my grief. Liam said he should have called me before. I told him I was glad he called at all. Sophie, who was 20 and in her 2nd year at MacEwan, texted me a voice memo the following day. She was crying. She said she loved me and she was ashamed. That was the word she used. Ashamed. I played that voice memo 4 times. Renee herself came to my house on October 15th. That would be exactly 3 weeks after the event. She came on a Tuesday afternoon, unannounced. Let herself in with the spare key I'd never thought to ask her to return. I was in the garage, reorganizing my tools, and I walked into the kitchen, and there she was, sitting at my table, a reusable coffee cup in her hands, looking like she'd already rehearsed what she was going to say. "Dad," she said, "we need to talk." I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. I was wearing my old work jacket, the canvas one Carol had given me the Christmas before she got sick. I remember thinking it was strange, being aware of what I was wearing in my own kitchen. "I've been thinking," Renee said, "and I know the September thing it wasn't handled well. But I want to move forward. I think we both need to. I want to move forward. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I was wrong. I want to move forward." I asked her to explain to me why I hadn't been invited. I asked her to say it clearly. Not the version she'd told Harold, and not the version she'd told Maureen. The real one. She looked at her coffee cup for a moment. Then she said that I had a tendency to make things about myself. That when Carol was dying, I had been so consumed by my own grief that the kids, she and her brother Derek, who lives in Vancouver, had had to process their loss privately, because there was no space for them. She said that the September event was for her, and for the people who loved Carol, and she had needed it to be a place where people could grieve and celebrate without managing me. I am going to be honest about what happened in my body when she said that. There was a long moment where I felt something very cold. Not anger. Anger is hot. This was cold. The feeling of standing in January without a coat and not being able to remember how to get back inside. I thought about Carol's last 6 months. I thought about the nights I had slept in the hospital chair because Carol said she slept better when she could hear me breathing. I thought about managing the medical team, the home care schedules, the medication, the paperwork, the conversations with her doctors when she was too tired to be present for them. I thought about keeping myself together in front of the kids, in front of Renee, for 18 months of watching my wife disappear. I thought about going home to an empty house for 7 years and finding ways to stay useful, to stay present, to keep showing up. And I thought about $53,000. I didn't say any of that. I said, "Is there something else you wanted to talk about?" She nodded. She said that the furnace in the Street Albert house needed to be replaced before winter. The quote was $9,000. She and Thierry had some credit card debt they were trying to manage, and the timing was difficult. She wondered if I could help. I looked at my daughter, my 50-year-old daughter, a licensed dental hygienist, married to a man who earned a regional manager's salary, sitting in my kitchen, asking me for $9,000. 3 weeks after she'd used my money to host a party, I wasn't allowed to attend, and I felt something shift. Not a dramatic shift, not the kind you see in movies, where the character stands up and delivers a speech. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling of something finally, solidly, landing. I said, "No." She looked at me. "I won't be helping with the furnace," I said, "or with anything else for a while." "Dad, I need you to hear me," I said. "Not so I can make tonight heavy, not because I want to make this about myself, but because I think you need to understand what you did, and I don't think you do yet." I told her what I'd done with the morning after I found out how I'd sat at the kitchen table and gone back through my records, the e-transfers, the checks, the withdrawals, everything going back 9 years. I told her the number, $80,000 before the September event, $53,000 for the event itself, $133,000 over 9 years. I'd had it sitting in a notebook on the counter. I slid it across to her. She looked at it. She didn't say anything for a moment. "I'm not telling you that to make you feel guilty," I said. "I'm telling you because I think you've spent 9 years seeing my generosity as something you were entitled to, and I don't know when that happened, but I know I let it happen. I made it easy for you to think there were no limits. That was my mistake, and I'm owning it." "That's not fair," she said. "We were struggling." "You were struggling in 2016, I said. "You haven't been struggling in the same way for 5 years, and you still called, every time." She said I was being cold. She said Carol would be disappointed in how I was acting. She said that the September event had been the most meaningful night of her adult life, and she was sorry I couldn't understand that. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen door and I held it open. "I'd like you to leave the spare key on the table," I said. "And I think it would be good for both of us if you didn't come by unannounced for a while." She stared at me. There was a long moment where I think she genuinely expected me to take it back, to sit back down, to be the father who always said yes. I could see it in her face, the small recalibration that was happening, the realization that the script had changed. She put the key on the table. She picked up her coffee cup. She walked past me without saying anything, and I heard her car back out of the driveway. I closed the door. I stood in my kitchen for a minute. Then I went back to the garage and finished organizing my tools. That was 4 months ago. Renee and I have not spoken since, not directly. Liam calls me every Sunday now. He drove out 2 weekends ago, and we went for a long walk along the River Valley Trail, and he told me, in the way that young men have of saying hard things by not quite looking at you, that his mother wasn't handling it well. I told him I loved him, and that none of this was his to carry. Sophie has come for dinner twice. She helped me go through some of Carol's old photos that I'd been putting off organizing for years, and we laughed a lot, and she cried a little, and it was one of the best evenings I'd had since before September. My brother Harold called me in November and said he was proud of me. He said he'd watched me give and give to Renee for years, and he'd never said anything because it wasn't his place, but that what she'd done with the September event was beyond what he could excuse, and that I had handled it with more dignity than he would have managed. Maureen sent me a card, an actual card, in the mail, which I have on my refrigerator. Thierry reached out by email in December. He said he wanted me to know that he had not been aware of the full situation with the September event, that he'd believed I was truly unwell and unable to attend, and that when he found out the truth he'd told Renee it was wrong. He said they'd had significant arguments about it. He said he respected my decision and hoped that in time things might improve. I replied and thanked him for writing. I meant it. I have not replaced the spare key. I'm writing this now in January, sitting at the same kitchen table where all of it happened. The birch tree in the backyard is bare, just branches against the gray Alberta sky, the kind of sky Carol used to say looked like a held breath. I'm 67 years old. I'm healthy. I have a pension and a paid-off house, and 2 grandchildren who love me and a brother in Saskatoon who calls every other week. I have more than a lot of people. What I've been thinking about these last few months is the version of events in which I'd said yes to the furnace, where I'd sat back down at that table and written another check and told myself it was for the sake of keeping the peace. I've been thinking about what that peace would have actually cost me, not in money, though the money mattered, but in the quieter currency of self-respect. I spent 9 years confusing generosity with love. They can coexist, generosity and love, but they're not the same thing. And when you start giving out of fear, fear of losing connection, fear of being unnecessary, fear of the silence that comes after you, say, no, that's not generosity anymore. That's something else. That's erosion. Carol used to say that the most loving thing you can do for someone is tell them the truth, even when the truth is that you've reached your limit. She was better at that than I was. She always knew when to hold firm and when to let go, and I used to think it was a kind of hardness in her, but I understand now it was the opposite. It was clarity. It was the refusal to let love become a transaction where one person does all the paying. I'm learning that at 67. Better late than never, I suppose. I donated $2,000 last month to a grief support organization in Edmonton that helps families navigating loss together. I've started volunteering on Tuesday mornings at the community workshop downtown, helping teenagers learn basic carpentry and repair skills, how to fix what's broken, how to build something that lasts. I'm sleeping better. I'm cooking again. Real meals, the kind Carol used to make on Sunday nights. Last week I made her chicken and leek soup from memory, and it was almost right. Almost right is enough for now. There is a particular kind of dignity that comes from finally, clearly, knowing what you will and will not accept. It doesn't feel like victory. It doesn't feel like anger. It feels more like standing on solid ground after a very long time of adjusting your footing. It feels like coming home to yourself. If you're someone who has spent years being the one who gives, who shows up, who says yes because saying no feels like betrayal, I want you to hear this. Your love is not measured by how much you can absorb. Your worth is not determined by your usefulness to the people who should love you regardless. The people in your life who truly see you will not require you to purchase their presence. And if the people around you have confused your generosity for obligation, the most honest thing you can do for them and for yourself is to let them learn the difference. I still talk to Carol sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet. I told her about the September event. I told her what I'd done at the kitchen table with Renee. I don't know if she can hear me, but I told her anyway. I think she would have understood.